I think we're at the end of the cycle. And for them to try to save the recession that's now due in 2018 or 19, they're going to have to increase, they're going to have to print so much money that they're going to trigger inflation that is going to run away from their control. So they really are caught between a rock and a hard place. I don't think they can save the economy again by printing trillions and distributing it into the system. That's done.
Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have a returning guest, Charles Hugh Smith. Charles is a financial writer, a book author. He's the creator and owner of of2minds.com, and I am very happy to have him back on the X22 Report Spotlight. Charles, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Thank you, Dave. I'm always appreciative of your program and the topics you introduce for us to discuss.
Hey, thanks for being here. And I love reading your articles. And recently I was looking over your site and I saw a couple of articles that I thought were very interesting, especially the one with before you tell me what you know, tell me your sources, talking about fake news sources. And a lot of, especially with Trump, he's calling out the corporate media saying you're fake news, you're fake news. And we know the corporate media has been using a lot of anonymous sources. And basically they've been telling us certain stories, and some of them are true and some of them are false. Do you think right now the whole thing is starting to fall apart for the corporate media? Do you think they're floundering, trying to figure out a way to bring people back to the corporate media to say, no, we're not fake news?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've just summarized the whole narrative that, the big impact is, of course, the internet itself that allows free exchange of ideas and information. And it really kind of puts the burden of sort of analysis and assessment on the reader or the viewer, right? In other words, it's a free-for-all. And that's a completely different world than the corporate media is used to, where they force feed the same news in quotes narrative. And we all know the experience. You turn your TV or whatever your device is that you're watching from each of the main networks, and they're all covering the exact same stories. They have the exact same clips, and they're interviewing the exact same quote experts.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But we are concerned about trouble and trending irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
And so, yeah, it's like lockstep. And so the internet is really disrupting that. And so they're in a panic to suppress the free exchange of ideas and information on the internet, because it's really eroding their grasp on the primary narratives.
Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, these are all social media platforms, but they also deal in news. Now, should they be able to tell us who is fake and who is real? Is it their job to make that decision?
That's the question that's presented to us as a populace, as a group of citizens. And it's also the question to our government, right? Because the government in the past has been, more or less protective of access to media, however modest it might be, right? That there's the FCC kind of monitors the established media to make sure that there's access to a variety of opinions and that kind of thing. And so how do we deal with social media, private corporations whose sole reason to exist is to maximize their profits? How is it that they can monitor and assess the quote truth or validity of some source? I mean, as you say, is it not only is it their job, but do they have the ability to do so? And how can we trust them when their entire purpose to exist is to maximize their profits? So aren't they going to select the news sources that maximize their profits? I mean, would they sink their profits and doom their enterprise, all in service of free trade of free ideas? I don't think so. So, the thing is riddled with inconsistencies, from a number of points of view.
So Facebook, they're putting up or they're trying to figure out how to put this trust model together where they're saying, okay, here are the news sources that we trust. And when you look at the different companies, they're pretty much all the same. I mean, they're all owned by, the same corporations, and they're just putting them in order, but you're getting the same information. I mean, to me, it seems like they're trying to force us in a certain direction and keep everyone away from the alternative media. To me, that's kind of a type of censorship where they're telling you that, oh no, we're going to flag this story from this individual because, our fact checkers and things like that tell us that it's not real. So look at this trusted news site. So they're basically censoring other people because they're telling you not to look there, that look over here instead.
I think you've encapsulated the key issue here, which is censorship, which is being described in terms other than the word censorship. It's being cloaked or masked, and so we're being told, "Oh, we're protecting you, the dumb, passive audience from fake news," but we're not calling it censorship. So, part of the core of linguistic analysis is to call things what they really are. And so what you're suggesting now is, let's call censorship what it really is, which is censorship. And that's a verboten word in this whole discussion because nobody wants to be pinned with the truth is that they're censoring. And it's a very subtle process. Like, I don't know how your site has been hit with restrictions from YouTube and Facebook and Google search and all this kind of stuff. I think it's impacting many of the alternative media sites. And I myself was of two minds, was put on Prop or Not's famous 2016 hit list of Russian dupes, as sites that were supposedly in service of Russia and all that kind of thing. And then somebody did an investigation of who, in fact, was Prop or Not, because they were very mysterious. They didn't state who they were or what their sources were. And it turns out they were fake news. In other words, they were a construct of some other lobbying outfit, right? And then the Washington Post absorbed this fake list from people that were totally anonymous, and they put it on page one. And so you have to ask, well, how is that not fake news that's being propagated by the mainstream media and promoted as if it's real when it was total fake news? So that's where the consumer is going, well, wait a minute. If somebody can invent some organization out of thin air, like Prop or Not, and you can do a study, right? There's lots of these things. You can start an academic publication that's totally bogus. The people are paying you $3,000 to get their name in the publication, right? There's so much flimflammery within the source industry, if you will, that we really can't trust institutions that we used to trust. In other words, some academic paper might be bogus, or it might be flawed, under analysis, or some think tank is actually a front for a lobbyist. I mean, there's so much of this kind of stuff going on that my recent article was saying that the propagation of official news and fake news is using the exact same mechanism, front organizations, fake experts, data that looks okay when you first glance at it, but doesn't hold up to statistical analysis, and so on. And other people within academia and so on are noticing the same things. There's a lot of iffy research out there that's being pawned off as legitimate third-party verified research in service of some lobbyist or some corporation's product.
I mean, what YouTube has done, especially with my channels, and I spoke to many other people, is during certain events like a mass shooting or something like that, they went to every YouTube channel and basically gave people strikes. Like I have a strike on the X22 Report channel, and I I did have a strike on the X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel. That went away because they only give it for like 3 months or so, and then it disappears if you don't get another strike. And it seemed like before the event, they went through all past videos and they brought up anything that they could find that had to do with mass shootings and stuff like that. And they reported it as bullying and basically gave you a strike. And what that did to the alternative media, it made everyone very nervous because some channels got taken down because they received, 1, 2, 3 strikes because they had maybe had 2 or 3 videos up. And it made you actually censor yourself while you were talking about certain things, or you didn't mention it at all, which was censoring yourself, because you knew if you did mention it, they would give you a strike. So it seems like they're forcing people who are running these alternative media channels or writing articles to censor themselves, or Google will delist you like they did with Natural News. They took down his website at one point. They took down his YouTube channel. And it seems like that's the approach they're using.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That and that, of course, is the ideal of any totalitarian system. In other words, a totalitarian government like the old Soviet Union or the Nazi regime, they wanted to control not just the official media, but they wanted to control every cultural institution. So they, of course, controlled the universities and the educational system. They controlled the churches. They controlled the museums. They controlled music, art. In other words, you're going to try to control everything. But if you can get the people, the creators of content, to do their own censorship, then you really it lightens your load, right? I mean, that's what some analysts call power. There's force and there's power. Force means you hire 20,000 people to go through all this content and they're whacking stuff and blacklisting it and so on. Where power is you convince people to do all that for themselves, of their own so-called accord. And so and it is really. The other impact is financial, is that a huge number of people in the alternative media are reporting dramatic drops in their income. That their YouTube channel used to provide almost a living for them, and then it's been slashed to nothing. And advertising revenues are being hit because Facebook and Google are taking more and more of whatever revenues are being generated from online ads. So it's like they're also undercutting us financially. So it's getting harder and harder to actually support yourself as an alternative media content creator or reporter. And so people are, I think, as a generality, lots of us are being forced to turn to Patreon and Steam it and other ways of generating revenue directly from users because advertising based on Google and Facebook is being taken away.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I wanted to switch topics. I wanted to switch out to what is happening out in Iran. And we know that Trump, he got rid of the Iranian deal and he appointed John Bolton, who is basically a neocon. I mean, that's the way I see him. And he wants regime change in Iran. And he's more like a warmonger who wants war. And they've been trying to push war for a very long time. What do you think Trump is trying to accomplish by getting rid of the Iranian deal and appointing John Bolton?
It's a great topic, and I want to just start out by stipulating that I am not an expert in this field. I'm just like everybody else. I'm trying to read between the lines and trying to find out something beneath the official narrative. And of course, that's all guesswork. And so what I'm proposing, my response is going to be just, it's speculative, okay? I don't have any insider sources, right, to back up my claims. But my position on Bolton was, there seems to be this tug of war between what many of us call the deep state or the unelected government and Trump's administration. That and there sort of seems to be a push-pull here. And a lot of people have declared that Trump's lost, that the swamp drained Trump. And now he's, because he's appointed these warmongers and neocons like Bolton, the alternative point of view, and I'm only posing it as an alternative. I really don't know what's going on there, but it is certainly plausible that he appoints guys like Bolton to appear to be running with the pack. and that then he can then control Bolton. And so it's one of those things like you want your enemies close to you. So you want your enemies inside your tent, not outside. And so bringing in these neocons gives Trump a way more control over them than if they were outside, So that's one possibility. And I notice that he gets rid of people very quickly. And I don't really have any emotional attachment to Trump one way or the other, right? And so I'm not a fan. I'm not a critic. It's like he's only one little part of a very large puzzle, of the American empire. And so, there's lots of other things that are just as interesting or more interesting than what Trump's trying to do. So anyways, having said that, he might just fire Bolton in a few months after he's extracted whatever value he wanted from Bolton being there. And so, Trump's appointees don't even last a year. In terms of Iran, I read somebody else's post. I believe it was on the Automatic Earth site, where the guy was saying, hey, look, we didn't even have a treaty with Iran. This never went past the Senate. It was like more or less a secret deal of the Obama administration, and the terms are not public. And so it was sort of a faux treaty, a fake treaty, if you will. In other words, a real treaty is made public, and the Senate has to approve it for it to become policy in the U.S. And so none of that happened in the so-called Iranian deal. And so it looks like there's a certain argument that I think has some validity that says, no, what we really need is like a real treaty, not some fake thing that was done in secret, that nobody knows what the real terms are, and that we should push for a real treaty. And if that's the ultimate outcome of Trump's blowing away this secret agreement, then that would be a positive in my mind. And why not get a treaty that actually holds water and that the American people have some say over? So that would be a positive outcome. The negative outcome would be, as we all fear, that regime change is in the air. But Iran has a lot of geopolitical aces in its hand, and so it's not that easy to manage regime change. I think if I were involved in this, as an analyst in the Pentagon or something, I would not be looking for regime change. I would be looking to weaken their currency, because once your currency is undermined, then you end up like Venezuela. And it seems like that might be succeeding, because the Iranian currency, from what I gather, has declined a lot in value, in purchasing power. So if you wipe out a country's or erode their currency's purchasing power, you're going to create social disorder, because people can no longer buy stuff from the outside world. The price of food skyrockets, and those are all bad things for the regime that's in power. So if you give them that kind of problem to deal with, you don't even need to change the regime yourself. The people of Iran will do it for you.
So this deal that was made, where you're saying it's a faux treaty, so there's like information in this deal that the American people, we don't even know what it says.
Well, again, trying to sort out what really happened, my impression is that there was a delivery of cash, a bunch of pallets of U.S. dollars. And a lot of people have questions about that. And then exactly what is the sunset provision of this deal? And in other words, the thing sunset in 10 years, and then Iran is free to pursue its nuclear weapon policy. It's that kind of stuff is unclear to me, and I'm just another consumer of the mass media. So, but it's quite a bit different if we want to compare it to the SALT I and SALT II treaties that the U.S. had with the Soviet Union, where these negotiations were largely public, and the trade-offs that each nation was making, to get the deal, were all public. And there was a public signing where representatives of the Soviet Union and the U.S. signed a real treaty, that had these stipulations and these oversights, and it was like a real structure. And so that seems to be lacking in this Iranian deal. There doesn't seem to be any equivalent. And the SALT I and SALT II treaties were really effective. I mean, they really did cut the number of nuclear weapons and reduce the risk of war between the Soviet Union and the U.S. But that worked because it was a real treaty and there was oversight. So we don't seem to have any of that in the Iranian deal. So it seems like there could be better agreements that would serve the interests of Iran and the U.S. better.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Trump, and he said it many, many times, where he's saying that we need a different deal. We need to come up with something. And of course, he knows what the deal says because he probably has all the information, but can't give it to the American people, I assume. And I agree with you on Bolton. I think he's keeping him very close to see how he reacts, what he does. Just like McMaster's, he kept him all along with the whole North Korean crisis. And as soon as the peace deal was struck and they had an agreement, it looked like then all of a sudden it said, okay, I don't need you, McMaster's, anymore. You're out. And, I did what I needed to do. I distracted everyone and we got the peace deal. And I do agree with you on Bolton. I think he's keeping the enemies very, very close so he can understand, what they do, how they operate, and he watches them. I think you're right about that.
And I don't want to put out something that offends anybody, but you could almost look at the way that Trump functions, at least through his tweets and all that stuff, as kind of an idiot savant. In other words, a lot of what he does it makes like no sense at first, or he seems to have caved in to the neocons, and then he pulls a rabbit out of the hat later and fires them all. So it's certainly a entertaining drama.
I think he does this on purpose. I think that's his strategy, to make everyone believe that he's a bumbling idiot. I really do. I think he goes around acting like a bumbling idiot and putting out these tweets, and people laugh at him. People make fun of him. The corporate media goes off on the tweets. I think that's his strategy also, to make up, some of these tweets. Some of them are really based in truth, but they seem so outrageous that the corporate media goes off on it, and they're like, oh, look what this idiot's doing again. And I think he's keeping them very distracted on all this stuff. And I mean, what better strategy is that, to make everyone believe you're an idiot, but behind the scenes, you're really strategizing and planning other things? I mean, that's what I would do.
It's a great way to navigate the Washington power struggle, which has whole agencies filled with people with sharpening their knives to stick them in your back.
And if you compare this with like past presidents, where they came out, like we'll use Obama for instance, where he says, Syria's, they're crossing the red line. I mean, they told you all the things that people wanted to hear, or maybe they didn't want to hear it, but they laid it out. But that's not really what was going on behind the scenes. But they made it seem so serious and so like, this is what we have to do. But behind the scenes, they were doing something completely different too. So it seems like they're both using the same type of tactic, except Trump is just looking more like an idiot when he does it.
Yes, and he's using social media to speak directly to the populace through his tweets, which is an innovation, if you will. The past presidents always went through like their press secretaries and sort of the official media, and that may be partly why the official media is so upset and focused on Trump's sort of faux pas and as you say, his craziness in quotes, because he's really cut him out of the loop in terms of they used to be the conduit for all official communications from the presidency. And now they've sort of been cut out, and now they're on the sidelines as commentators. So, yeah, again, it's good to remind us. I always remind myself, none of us really knows what's going on the ground in Syria. We'd have to be there, and we'd have to have access to Turkish intelligence, Russian intelligence, Israeli intelligence, Iraqi intelligence. I mean, without that kind of sourcing, nobody knows what's going on. We're just accepting stuff as if it's true, but we don't really know. So it's always good to, take everything with a grain of salt, including all the news about the U.S. economy.
Yeah, true. And let's go into the economy. You wrote an article about taking the pulse of the weakening economy, and we see that the Federal Reserve, they're raising interest rates, and they're unwinding right now. Does that mean the economy is back to normal, it's strong, and we can proceed moving forward now?
Yeah, I think that's the main, the primary narrative that's being pushed. And then the alternative narrative is that if we reported inflation over the last 10 years at its real run rate, the inflation rate in the real world economy, rather than the suppressed official rate, which has been meandering along at 1 or 2%. If we included real inflation and we factored out the impact of the incredible debt that's been accumulated in the last 10 years, the trillions of dollars that corporations, the governments, state, local, and federal have borrowed to stimulate the economy. If we took all that stimulus out, we'd actually discover that there was no growth at all over the last 9 years. And so, in other words, that would explain why many of us feel the real economy is still stumbling along, still stagnating in terms of wage growth and the impact on the bottom 80% of the populace, right? All the gains of this supposed 9 years of growth have gone to the top 5%. I mean, the majority. And apparently statistically, I have put a chart that came from the New York Times that most of the gains go to the top 1/10%. So whatever gains that we have made are really asymmetric. In other words, they've gone to the top, and the bottom 95% have seen very little in the way of gains from whatever growth we actually got. And like I said, if we subtract out inflation and debt, maybe we didn't grow at all. So that really undermines the official narrative. And in terms of interest rates, we all know that debt powers our economy. So if it costs more money to borrow, then that's going to have a huge impact on future spending. And from my point of view, and from the point of view many of us share, is that by pushing borrowing, lowering interest rates to near zero and flooding the system with liquidity and trying to encourage people to borrow and spend more money, it's called bringing demand forward. In other words, you might have saved up and bought a car in 3 years, but because you got a 0% financing, you bought the car now. Well, that means you're not going to buy a car in 2 or 3 years because you already have one. So at some point, this thing of bringing demand forward and encouraging people to buy what they might have bought in a year or two now, eventually the future arrives and there's no demand, regardless of how cheap interest rates are. But if interest rates go up, then you're suppressing demand as whatever's left of it. But I think, in my view, what the real story of the economy is, it's depending more and more on the marginal borrower and the marginal employer. In other words, it's everybody that was a legitimate qualified buyer has already bought whatever it is they wanted. And so the buyers that are now out there of vehicles or homes, they're on the margins. They're not fully qualified. They're a risk. They're a risk that lenders should manage, but the lenders are so desperate to generate profits by making loans that the lending standards are declining, which is exactly what led to the 2008 global financial crisis. So it seems like we're repeating history.
I think you're right, because Fannie Mae, I was looking at that, and they had a 3% down, and this was a while back, where they went ahead with 3% down and they did an income check. Now they're doing 3% down with no income check to bring more people into the housing market. And I see that as very, very dangerous. And we're entering the same exact thing that we did back prior to 2008, like you said.
The liar loans. And so, a lot of people wonder whether we're getting in inflation, deflation, stagflation, which is, a stagnant economy plus rising interest rates. And that's what we had in the 70s, which, a lot of people don't remember because they weren't born. But, there seems to be cycles of interest rates, and we want to find some cause, like the Federal Reserve can control interest rates, or that, economic growth will demand higher interest rates, or we want some sort of causal explanation. But it very well could be that interest rates rise for a variety of reasons, and they're on a long cycle of about 30 to 35 years. And so we're at the end of that almost 40-year cycle of declining interest rates. And so now interest rates are starting to go up. And if you believe in the validity of cycles, then we can anticipate interest rates continuing to rise for 10, 15, 20 years. And so given the vast quantities of debt that are burdening the system, the federal debt, private debt, consumer debt, corporate debt, all of that debt has to be serviced. And so if interest rates click up, more and more of the national income is going to be going to paying interest, and less will be available for investing in infrastructure, spending on consumer goods, and so on. And so if you look forward and you go, well, if interest rates are going to rise for the next decade, that's just going to kill the economy. And there's no way around that, because they already played the one trick they had, which was drop interest rates to zero. And now that they burned that trick, that's done. So how's the economy going to grow if people have to divert more and more of their income to service the debt they already have?
Do you think they're bringing the interest rates up so when the recession hits? I mean, some people say we're already in the recession and they're just manipulating the numbers and making it seem like everything is fine. But if they bring, and I remember this from 2008, prior to 2008, they brought the interest rates up and then everything started to fall apart and they started to bring them down. You think they're bringing them up so they can bring them right back down because they know there's going to be a recession?
That's a thought that many people share, and I suspect that that's what they have in mind. That's their intention. But as I was trying to explain before, if interest rates are rising for secular reasons, more deep-seated reasons relating to the size of the existing debt and the risk assessment of savers. Should I buy this bond paying almost nothing, or should I not buy that bond? That kind of stuff. If there's powerful, systemic reasons for interest rates to continue rising, then we can anticipate the Federal Reserve and other central banks failing in their effort to reduce interest rates again to zero. In other words, because really how do they drop interest rates? Well, they buy trillions of dollars of bonds. They basically replace private demand for interest-bearing bonds with the free money. In other words, so they've been buying bonds that paid almost nothing. And that's how they've suppressed interest rates. But every time that you go through an iteration of this kind of policy, the policy's impact weakens. And so the next time they try to drop interest rates, for the reasons I spoke of earlier, meaning that demand has already been brought forward, marginal, the only people left that want to buy something are mostly marginal buyers with very poor credit risk. So they're not going to get the impact they did in 2008 and 9 by dropping interest rates. It's going to have very limited impact. And meanwhile, all that debt that's been piled up in the system, it's still locked in. In other words, it didn't go away. And so that the cost of their policy of lowering interest rates to zero was an immense expansion of global debt. And that doesn't go away. And so I'm trying to describe this dynamic where when you lower interest rates and debt levels are relatively modest, you get this big boost, right? Because people go, wow, I can buy a new car. It's 0% financing. But once they already have an auto loan, then they're not really able to go out and buy a second or third car because they still have the debt that they accumulated in the first cycle. So there's sort of like limits on what the central banks can do going forward. So
do you think the central banks will resort to universal basic income or something like that in the next crisis?
I think they will. And my reasoning is not out of the goodness of their hearts, but for two much more cynical reasons. Number one, they want us debt serfs. In other words, the bottom 95% of the population who has a mortgage or an auto loan, they want us to have enough money to service our debt. Because if we start defaulting en masse, then the banks blow up. And the political will to save the banks again is near zero. I mean, Obama got away with it because he was elected as a savior, and he had a lot of personal support, and so he was able to go in there and save the banks and give them $16.8 trillion of bailout and subsidies. I don't think the political will exists for saving the banks again. So by giving us all $1,000 a month, we're not going to be prospering, but we'll be able to make our auto loan and our student loan payment. That's all they care about. And they also care about avoiding social disorder, right? And so if they can borrow or create, print several $1 trillion a year extra and give everybody $1,000 a month to keep quiet, then the status quo will continue on, and those people who hold all the power and wealth will be very happy. We'll be making our interest payments, and we'll be passively watching, playing games and watching YouTube.
But wouldn't that put a lot of currency into the system? And if there's more currency in the system, wouldn't that devalue the currency, and which means inflation?
Oh, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. That's the Achilles heel of the whole universal basic income.
So the money that they're giving us, wouldn't that become worthless at some point? Because as they keep printing it and we're receiving it and then we're going out and spending it, it's all circulating in the economy and it keeps devaluing the dollar, and we're seeing inflation every single time. There's going to be a point where it's not even going to work anymore.
This is a fairly complicated topic, but when you create $1 trillion out of thin air and you give it to the banks and financiers, they're not really spending it. Very little of it goes into the real economy, right? I mean, right. Maybe the car salesman, maybe the Jaguar car salesman gets a commission or something, right? But when you give $1 trillion to people in the bottom 80%, they spend virtually all of it, right? Or they might say 5%. So 95% of that money goes directly into the economy. And then that's, as you say, how you get inflation. So people ask, well, how come we have asset inflation but no real world inflation, or not so much as we might expect? And it's because, well, when you print trillions of dollars and give it to the banks and financiers, they don't spend it in the real economy. They simply buy up all the assets. So you get asset inflation. But once we start giving $1 trillion or $2 a year to people who are going to go out and spend it, then you're going to get real world inflation that's uncontrollable. I mean, the Fed only has a couple of levers to pull, and they can't control inflation. Once they print the money and distribute it, it's going to have a power of its own.
Do you think we're coming up to the end of this cycle? Because, I mean, we're in the great financial crisis of 2008. Now it's 2018. It's been, like 10 years now. And this is a very long stretch. I mean, do you think we're heading towards the end of this cycle?
I think there's a very strong case to be made for that. And my argument is going to go back to 2016. And if you look at charts of the stock market and debt and a lot of the moving parts of the global economy, there was a near recession in 2016. Like the cycle kind of was running out of steam, 2 years ago. And what happened is the central banks went crazy and they printed another trillions of yuan, yen, euros, and dollars to save the global economy from the recession that should have occurred in 2016. So they bought us another couple of years, but at an immense price. Now there's so much more debt than there was just 2 years ago, and so they goosed the stock market higher, and spending drifted upwards, and so they quote saved the system, but it's not cost free. And so, yeah, I think we're at the end of the cycle. And for them to try to save the recession that's now due in 2018 or 19, they're going to have to increase, they're going to have to print so much money that they're going to trigger inflation that is going to run away from their control. So they really are caught between a rock and a hard place. I don't think they can save the economy again by printing trillions and distributing it into the system. That's done.
Charles, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
Yeah, visit me at of2minds.com. And it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me on the program.
Hey, thanks for being here. Thanks again for being on the Spotlight.